Today we're going to look at spawning an enemy when the player reaches a certain position in the scene. This will be the spawn point. This is an area 2D which the player is going to come into contact with. So what will happen is this. Player moves into the scene, enemy spawns, and if you see there, the enemy will keep spawning, but we can also alter this if we like. So let's get into how we're going to achieve this. Firstly, we'll create a world scene with just a 2D node, world, and just save it as that for now. A new scene for the player, which will be kinematic body 2D. Call it player. And a collision shape. And give the shape, collision shape some shape. We'll give it a rectangle, and we want to add a sprite. We'll add a sprite there. I will leave a link in the description for these couple of things. Obviously he's too big, so we'll take him down to a quarter. And give him a script. Take away the comments, create the script, and then we'll just save that. Just play out. Another new scene, we'll create the enemy. Have that as a kinematic body 2D as well. We've already done it, haven't we? Call it enemy. Give that a collision shape. Give it a shape. And give it a sprite. We'll use the zombie sprite. Again, scale it down. Give that a script as well. Any script, create, save that. And to save time and not put you through my excruciatingly slow typing, I'll copy and paste the relevant scripts for this. Okay, for the enemy, it's just going to be straightforward AI movements with velocity, speed, and gravity. In the physics process, we have velocity y equal to gravity. Velocity, we're only going to go in one direction, so we don't need to do a variable for direction. We're just going to go to the right. So we just need to move and slide to velocity. You should be able to pause the video and just copy that out. For the player, pretty much standard. We're just going to use the left and right arrow keys to move him. That's all we need. So you can pause the video and just copy this out. The world scene doesn't need a script for this, so we will just select the world scene just to start the game. Which obviously is nothing at the moment. What we do need to add in the world scene though is a tile map. Tile map, new tile set, click on that, and we will drag this temple tiles to here. And what we're going to do is a new single tile. Click on that. And it's going to be a collision tile with the shape of a square. Back in the world scene. Let's come out a bit and we'll just put some tiles here just for the sprites to land on. And we will instance the player scene into the world. And instance player. Bring him down to, oh no, we didn't do that. Let's just make sure all is selectable. And have him over to the right. Of course, we haven't done the collision shape on the player yet. Collision shape. Hold Alt to make sure you just keep that selected. And haha! Oh, of course I've got it. Let's do that first. Oh dear, what's going wrong? Do the same for the enemy over here. Where's that collision shape too? Be good enough for this project. Again, work everything together. Did I do that one there? No. Like that. Right. Okay, so we've got one player. In the world, we'll add an area 2D. And we need to give that a collision shape as well. Again, give it a square shape. call this spawn. We can lost that as well. We'll just take that and we'll bring that down to, say, there. We also need to give this a script. My bad, we don't want to name this point. What we're going to do, we're going to use this as the trigger. It's going to trigger the spawn, and the collision shape, make it a bit of an oblong thing. And while we're at it, in the debug, put tick visible collision shape so we can see them when it's running. So the next thing now is to add a new scene, and we want a position 2D. Add a position 2D. We'll name this spawn. And give it a script. Create. Why did I give the spawn point a script? We don't need that. Save that. The spawn scene. Spawn point. Close. Don't need it. Okay, again, I will just copy and paste the code in there for you to copy. So what we're doing on the position 2D, we're going to export the spawn scene, which is a packed scene, creating a function where the variable spawn scene is going to be equal to the spawn scene, and we're then going to create an instance of it. We're going to create an instance every time we connect to this. We add the child spawn to the main scene, and we're using the spawn global position, which is equal to the global position, which means that wherever that spawn is in the world scene, it will do it. And this function will be triggered by the we called it a different name now, so on body entered, oh, we can't do it from here. What am I doing? Right, we need to instance the spawn scene. It should be in the world one. Now when we go onto the area 2D on body entered, we want to access the spawn script. So that one is from the other one I was doing, and just delete that. Sorry about that. I should have named it the same, then it would have just done it. So on the body entered, We want to spawn, don't we? Oh dear, oh dear. What are we doing? That. And again. I should rehearse these things more. And we're going to spawn. It's better. So now when the player enters the area 2D, it's going to trigger the spawn script. Now the pack scene bit, we've exported the variable, and that is why we need to go over to the inspector. Spawn scene, which you've exported, is now empty. So what we want to do is put the zombie, the enemy, script, the enemy into there. So that's the scene that we're going to spawn. Okay, now if we press play, move our character into there, it spawns, and obviously when the zombie keeps hitting it, it keeps spawning it. And on and on. Of course you can have the spawn any way you like. Get there. And just keep going. Now the next thing we need to do is layers. Okay, let's have a look at layers. As you can see, the player they all default onto layer 1. Player, the enemy, and tile map, and the trigger for the spawning. So we want to go into project settings, come down to layer names, 2D physics, and rename the layers as to which object is going to go on what. So we'll have layer 1 as the player, layer 2 as the tile map, the floor, layer 3 as the enemy, and layer 4 as the spawn trigger. Close that down, come back into the world, tile map, and as you'll see now we've got the names for them there. So tile map, don't want it to be the player, we want it to be the floor. The floor doesn't really need to see anything in the second layer. The player is on its right one now, we've got that right. Spawn trigger, we'll put on there. And the enemy in its own layer there. So you've got them all on their own layer. Now the player needs to see in the mask the floor, the spawn trigger, and probably the enemy as well. The spawn trigger doesn't really need to see anything itself, We can leave that empty. And what have we forgotten to do? Anything? Let's have a look. Yep, we forgot to put the floor on the enemy. The enemy is not seeing any floor. As you can see, the enemy doesn't see the spawn trigger there, so he just spawns once, but he does see the player. Well, that's because we put on the player's mask that it's seeing the enemy. On the other hand, now if we go to the enemy and say see the spawn trigger, it will now keep spawning enemies. And on the other hand, if the player, we say don't see the enemy, we can work this either way, on the enemies to the player or the player to the enemy. Now it should just ignore the player altogether and just keep on spawning. So that's how you use layers.